Good evening. I'm William Brangham. Amna Nawaz and Jeff Bennett are away. On the NewsHour tonight, the Supreme Court upholds a gun control law that prohibits domestic violence abusers from owning guns. We take a closer look at the political fundraising after the Biden and Trump campaigns received multi-million-dollar donations from billionaires. And following Prime Minister Modi's securing a third term in office, Muslims in India continue to face discrimination and hate.
We felt terrible. We wondered why they were demolishing our mosque and school. It didn't do any harm to anyone. They told me, "This is not your school. This is the government's land now."
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The Supreme Court today handed down a major victory for gun control advocates, ruling that domestic violence abusers can be barred from owning guns. In an 8-1 decision, the court rejected a Second Amendment challenge to the federal law that makes it illegal for people with domestic violence restraining orders to possess firearms. Joining us now is our Supreme Court analyst, Marcia Coyle. Marcia, so nice to see you, as always. So this, again, major Second Amendment decision, 8-1, but a lot of writing today. 7 justices felt they needed to weigh in on this, writing on this. Remind us what this case was all about and what the court ruled.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rahimi was the person who challenged the federal law, the federal ban, and he had a domestic violence restraining order against him. He was a pretty bad actor, William, to be honest with you. I mean, he physically assaulted his girlfriend, threatened her and his child that they had. He shot off his gun on different occasions, despite the restraining order, and in different places as well. His challenge went all the way up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. That court ruled in his favor and struck down the federal law after applying the test that the Supreme Court announced in 2022 in a case that we call Bruin, had to do with New York's open carry laws. And that test is whether the gun regulation being challenged, whether there is a tradition, a history of gun regulation prior to 1900 that would support the current law. The Fifth Circuit said, nope, we couldn't find anything, so they struck it down. The Biden administration brought the case to the Supreme Court, and today the majority said, sorry, but we found there was historical support for this law and pointed to 2 different sets of laws that could had principles, the Chief Justice said, that support the principle behind the or undergirding the federal law. What was pretty important, William, here is that the Chief said that the Bruin decision never meant that the law was trapped in amber, an interesting sort of metaphor, that really instead of looking for an historical twin to the current law, you look at principles, historical principles that could support the current regulation being challenged.
The one dissenter today was Justice Clarence Thomas, and he is the one who authored that Bruen decision. And I want to read a little bit of what he wrote in his dissent today. He wrote, "The question of whether the government can strip the Second Amendment right of anyone subject to a protective order, even if he has never been accused or convicted of a crime, it cannot. The court and government do not point to a single historical law revoking a citizen's Second Amendment right based on possible interpersonal violence." So it seems like that he is in direct opposition with the Chief Justice here. Does this chip away in some way at the strictures that Bruen had set up?
I think, in a way, William, it softens, maybe clarifies a little bit the Second Amendment test for the lower court judges. And those judges have been pretty critical of the Thomas test. They've complained that they're not historians. They don't have the time, the resources to do the historical research that's required. So I think when the chief sort of emphasized looking at principles, historical principles, it gives them a little more room. Even Justice Barrett, in her concurring opinion, had mentioned that historical regulations reveal principles, not molds. So I think there is a little softening here, but I have to tell you, honestly, that I think this conservative majority is still quite strongly in favor of the history and tradition test that they announced in Bruen. And it's very clear that the three liberals, even Justice Jackson now, who was not on the bench at the time of Bruen, made clear that they do not like this test at all, that they don't feel it's responsive to current needs.
I want to ask you a little bit about the impact that this might have on lower courts. Earlier today, we spoke to Gloria Terry. She is the CEO of the Texas Council on Family Violence. This is a group that works with domestic violence survivors. And she described tears of joy and relief when this ruling came down. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
This ruling is exactly what the advocacy field and the thousands of survivors across the country needed to hear, that their lives matter more than the ability of somebody who has lost that privilege to own a firearm. It sent waves of relief.
Marcia, you mentioned what this might mean for the Supreme Court. Do you have any sense as to whether this ruling then also ripples down into lower courts when they hear other potential gun control challenges?
Well, I'm quite sure the judges will be looking at this ruling and attempting to apply it. And there are many gun challenges coming. In fact, there are still some pending in the U.S. Supreme Court, but all different kinds of gun challenges. And, you know, the bump stock case we had just last week, that wasn't even a Second Amendment challenge. But I think there are many Second Amendment challenges coming, and that guns, very much in a sense like abortion, are going to continue to come to the Supreme Court. And we'll have to wait and see how this Supreme Court, after the opinion today, is going to apply it to those challenges.
And lastly, Marcia, we know next week is the Supreme Court's last week, but they certainly have a big backlog of major cases. What's the one you're really looking for, one or two, for next week?
Well, I'm sure, like many people, I'm very interested in what they're going to say about former President Donald Trump's claim of absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. That's probably at the top of many people's lists. And also, I think there's a major abortion case and also two very important social media First Amendment cases. So you're right, William. There's quite a bit still left over, and the tradition has been to finish it up by the end of June.
Gives me a strong suspicion that we are going to see you again next week. Marcia Coyle, as always, wonderful to see you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
In the day's other headlines, health officials and emergency workers in Gaza say that Israeli airstrikes on camps near Rafah have killed at least 25 people. 50 others were injured. It's just the latest attack on southern Gaza, where hundreds of thousands have sought shelter from the ongoing fighting. For its part, Israel's military released video of its continued ground offensive against Hamas. Meantime, in Lebanon, recent Israeli airstrikes have left southern border towns in ruins. Near daily exchanges of fire between Israel and Hezbollah prompted the UN chief to issue a stark warning.
One rash move, one miscalculation could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and, frankly, beyond imagination. Let's be clear. The people of the region and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Also today, Armenia became the latest country to officially recognize Palestinian statehood, despite opposition from Israel. Roughly 3/4 of the 193 UN member nations have done so. State media in China is reporting that at least 47 people have died amid catastrophic flooding and landslides in the south of the country. A week of downpours has walloped Guangdong province. One area saw more than 14 inches of rain in just a single day. State television showed a riverside village completely inundated by floodwaters. In the neighboring Guangxi province, rescuers deployed to a major city after a river there rose nearly 12 feet above its flood warning line. More extreme weather is forecast for other parts of the country. This week's record-setting heat is set to carry into the weekend across much of the U.S. 90 million Americans were under heat alerts today from California to the Rockies and from the Midwest through the Ohio Valley. A day earlier, temperature records were topped across New England. The sweltering heat will ratchet up in the Mid-Atlantic and the Gulf Coast this weekend, where heat indices may rise into the 100s. The European Union has officially set a date to begin membership talks for Ukraine and Moldova. Negotiations will begin on Tuesday in Luxembourg, but the full process could take years or even decades. Meantime, Russia says it shot down more than 114 Ukrainian drones overnight. Ukraine claims to have hit 3 oil refineries and a drone launch site in southern Russia. Today, President Putin said Russia would prioritize military production, including its nuclear program.
We plan to further develop the nuclear triad as a guarantee of strategic deterrence and to preserve the balance of power in the world.
Those comments come as South Korea summoned Russia's ambassador to protest Moscow's new defense pact with North Korea. This week, Putin and Kim Jong-un agreed that their nations would defend each other if either is attacked. In Nevada, a judge dismissed the charges today in a fake electors case against 6 Republicans. They're accused of submitting so-called fake elector certificates to Congress that falsely declared Donald Trump had won the state in the 2020 election. The judge said the case should have been brought in a venue that was closer to where the alleged crimes took place. Afterward, Nevada's Democratic Attorney General told reporters, quote, "The judge got it wrong and will be appealing immediately." But defense attorneys say the case is dead since the statute of limitations for filing charges expired back in December. The Food and Drug Administration has approved the first menthol-flavored electronic cigarettes for adult smokers. All e-cigarettes previously authorized by the FDA have been tobacco-flavored. The decision applies to 4 menthol products by the vaping brand Enjoy, which was recently acquired by Marlboro maker Altria. It lends new credibility to claims by vaping companies that their products can help blunt the toll of traditional smoking. But parents' groups and anti-tobacco advocates criticize the decision. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, has approved new measures to handle misconduct. In a statement, the agency said 2 independent offices will hear, quote, claims of harassment, discrimination, other interpersonal misconduct, and retaliation following feedback from FDIC employees. This comes after a scathing workplace investigation that prompted the chairman of the board, Martin Gruenberg, to announce last month that he would resign. It was a quiet close to the week on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained just 15 points to close at 39,150. The Nasdaq slipped by 32 points. The S&P 500 also ended slightly lower. And the celebratory duck boats were back out in force in Boston today. Fans flooded the streets of Beantown to honor the Celtics for their record-setting 18th NBA championship. Celtic star Jason Tatum hoisted the Larry O'Brien Trophy to cheers from the crowd. The traditional duck boat parade has become a familiar sight in Boston because the city's many teams have won 13 titles already this century. Still to come on the NewsHour, amid growing scrutiny, British journalist Robert Winnett reverses course and backs out as the Washington Post's next top editor. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart break down the latest political headlines and recommendations on what movies to watch this summer.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The 2024 campaign was already shaping up to be the most expensive election of all time. But now, several high-profile billionaires are dumping massive amounts of money into the presidential race. Laura Barone-Lopez has the details of who these donors are and what their impact might be.
Thanks, William. New reporting shows two notable donations. Businessman Timothy Mellon gave $50 million to a Donald Trump-aligned super PAC the day after the former president was convicted of 34 felonies. And former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg, who challenged Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination in 2020, is spending $20 million to help the president's re-election effort. The campaigns themselves are reporting huge fundraising hauls as well. In May, the Biden team raised $85 million, but was outshadowed by the Trump team, which reported raising $141 million. Let's explore where the money is coming from and where it's being spent with Anna Masolia, Editorial and Investigations Manager at Open Secrets. Anna, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The contributions from mega donors like Mike Bloomberg and Timothy Mellon are eye-popping. How unusual are these donations, and what do you think it'll do for the campaigns?
Well, multi-million-dollar donations to super PACs are becoming run-of-the-mill at this point. But the size of these donations and the sources, in particular in the case of Mellon, where we have not seen a donation this large coming from him, and it being such a huge donation compared to others, it's one of the largest donations that we've seen, really stick out. With Mike Bloomberg, he has a long history of giving, of funding his own presidential campaign, so it is to be expected that he would give money to Joe Biden or to a super PAC supporting him. But when it comes to Timothy Mellon, his influence is much newer, and we are just now starting to really see what the full capacity of that influence is.
Yeah, as you said, a lot of people know who Mike Bloomberg is. They don't really know who Timothy Mellon is. Who is he, and how much of a big deal do you think it is that he's contributing to Trump at this point?
It's significant. Mellon is also given to a super PAC supporting for Kennedy as well as now to Trump, which really plays into the complicated dynamics of the Kennedy campaign's influence on the two main candidates.
To RFK Jr.
Yes, that's correct. And one of the things that's noteworthy is also this is not money going directly to the Trump campaign. This is going to a super PAC supporting him, MAGA Inc., which is the main super PAC aligned with the Trump campaign run by Trump allies. One of the big differences there is that super PACs can raise and spend unlimited sums, unlike campaigns which are limited with how much they're able to bring in from one specific individual. And the super PAC really opens the door for more billionaires to be able to pour money in to influence the elections.
So we know how much these billionaires are spending because it had to be disclosed, but what about the impact of money with murkier origins, so-called dark money? How prevalent is that this year?
Dark money is pouring into U.S. elections. One of the new ways that we are tracking at Open Secrets is dark money contributions to super PACs. While super PACs, as I mentioned, have to disclose the origin of their funding, who's donating to them, they can just disclose dark money groups, 501c groups that are not technically political committees, so they don't have to disclose the ultimate source of funding. They may disclose shell companies. And so even though the super PAC is following the letter of the law by disclosing who is giving the money to them, they are able to skirt the disclosure requirement because the ultimate funder is not known. And that is something that we're seeing on track for a new record this cycle, with money pouring into super PACs from dark money groups.
President Biden had a big cash week this week. He brought in $30 million at a Hollywood fundraiser that was the single biggest cash haul at a single event for the Democratic Party, broke a record there. But we're seeing that President Biden's cash advantage is slipping away and that Donald Trump is starting to catch up. How significant is that? Is it going to have a long-term impact?
We're certainly seeing the tables turn where for several months Biden was outraising Trump, had a larger cash reserve. And just these last 2 months, we're really starting to see Trump catching up and this month actually exceeding what Biden had raised, and especially Trump and the RNC compared to Biden and the DNC, which is another important dynamic, not just for the campaigns, but also for the parties, since that influences a number of other candidacies. And the money that's flowing in now, it depends how it's used. A big expense that Donald Trump has but Joe Biden does not would be legal fees. And so much of his money is being burned through for legal fees, whereas Biden is able to devote so much more funding to things like media and outreach and staffing. Expenses that Trump still has, but has less funding overall for when you count the legal fees.
How much money is going into the organizations like Heritage Foundation that is establishing Project 2025, which is this blueprint for a second Trump term?
One of the issues with outside groups such as 501c nonprofits is that they aren't expressly political. So they aren't legally required to disclose their fundraising to the Federal Election Commission, who their donors are, or even details of their spending, as long as they aren't expressly advocating for a candidate. And so with the case of the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action, it's a 501c3 and a C4. So we won't know anything about their finances that's substantial for this year until their next tax return is due. And even then, we won't know who's funding these efforts and very few details about how their spending is.
Anna Masolia of Open Secrets, thank you for your reporting.
Thank you for having me.
Turbulence is swirling in the top rungs of one of the nation's leading media outlets. The Washington Post is again looking for an editor-in-chief after the British journalist who was set to take that position just withdrew. This comes after a year marked by staff cuts at the Post, a high-profile resignation, and mounting red ink that totaled in the millions. Lisa Desjardins has more on it all and why it matters outside the D.C. Beltway.
The latest issue surrounds Robert Winnett, a British journalist who was to take over as the paper's top editor in November. Over the weekend, the Post and the New York Times published stories tying Winnett to multiple instances of using practices in the UK seen as unethical in this country, including fraudulently obtaining phone and other data. Today, the Post announced he is out. Winnett was handpicked by the paper's new publisher and CEO, William Lewis, who is also a British journalist and is also facing scrutiny and calls to resign. For more, we're joined by Margaret Sullivan, Executive Director for Columbia Journalism School's Newmark Center and a former columnist with The Post. To help our audience, I want to lay out what's been reported about Robert Winnett. He is a longtime investigative journalist. Now, The Post found a former source had written that Winnett helped cover up some clandestine activity, and the Post looked at his past stories and found that he may have used illegal means in his reporting as well. Now, Winnett has not responded publicly to these stories and allegations. As he is out and the publisher, his mentor, facing the same scrutiny, is still in, both of these men have long journalistic records. Are these transgressions enough to say they should not be leading the Post?
Well, Lisa, I think what we see is a history of prominent journalism. I think some of the practices that they have used, both Winnett and Lewis, have been things that maybe they fly in the UK, but they actually run pretty counter to the ethics and standards of sort of big journalism in the United States. So these are things that the New York Times and the Washington Post would not do. For example, paying for a scoop, working with a source who has stolen material. These kinds of things which have come out in recent days are just practices that, again, maybe they're kind of okay in tabloid journalism in the UK, but they really seem to us to be very dicey.
This is a statement about journalism in the United States, but also the Washington Post. But I want to ask you, why does it matter to folks outside of the D.C. Beltway who is running the newsroom at the Washington Post?
Well, the Washington Post is one of the most important news organizations in the nation and really in the world. And it has, as I think people may remember, a really strong history of holding powerful people and institutions accountable, most notably during the 1970s when it broke the Watergate story and helped to unseat a corrupt president in Richard Nixon. But even in many cases since then, the kind of journalism that the Washington Post does, the kind of investigative work it does, has been extremely important and has resonated through all of the media ecosystem and has made a difference in our country. So it's not just, one newsroom, who cares? It really goes far beyond that.
We've seen billionaires have increasing influence directly on media. That includes Jeff Bezos, of course, the Amazon founder, owner of the Post. What does this say about his leadership there? He said he wanted an ethical paper, for the next kind of dawn of journalism.
I think that Bezos has been a good owner for the Post. When he took over, when he bought the Post for a bargain price of $250 million back in 2013, Don Graham, who the Graham family had owned the Post for a long time, told him, the paper is going to scrutinize you and it's going to scrutinize Amazon, and you need to be okay with that. And Bezos has really done that. He has not interfered in the editorial product. He hasn't messed with the newsroom, and he has tolerated the Post's own reporting on him. And he's really celebrated the journalism at the Post and been a supportive and good owner. So now, the question is, which Washington Post does he want to be the owner of? The one that he bought, or something else that seems to be on the horizon right now?
Your last column with the Post was a warning and a clarion call to journalists about the 2024 election year. The stakes, again, are so high. How do you think journalism is situated right now to deal with this strange, let me call it, election that we're facing?
I think journalists have learned a lot since the mistakes of 2016, when they really didn't see Donald Trump coming entirely, and they've self-corrected somewhat. But I think what needs to happen is for journalists to emphasize, as my friend and colleague Jay Rosen says, not the odds, but the stakes. In other words, not the horse race or the polls or who's up and who's down, but what are the consequences of this election? And so I would like to see newsrooms really stress that in the months ahead, because American voters need to go to the voting booth knowing exactly what's at stake.
Margaret Sullivan, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
This morning's Supreme Court ruling marks a major moment for a country divided over access to guns. On that and more, we turn to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for the Washington Post. Gentlemen, happy Friday. So nice to see you both. Jonathan, about the Rahimi case that I mentioned, this marks really the first time that the court has affirmed a gun control measure after a very long stretch of moving in the opposite direction. What are your takeaways of this?
Well, this is one of those cases where it's a sigh of relief, I think, could be heard throughout the country, especially for a court where people have been so geared up waiting for the worst decisions to come out. And on this one in particular, especially after the Heller decision from, I think it was 2022, which decimated New York City's gun safety laws, the idea that people actually thought the United States Supreme Court would say it's okay to be a domestic abuser and keep your gun. The fact that people thought that that was a possibility shows you just how far the court has swung to the right and how low in terms of esteem lots of people hold the court. But the court made the right decision. And clearly it was one at an 8-1 decision.
Right.
It was the right thing to do morally, but also the right thing to do legally.
I mean, the Heller decision that Jonathan mentions, that was Justice Antonin Scalia, a devoted gun rights activist, who said, yes, the Second Amendment confers a right to own a gun. But he also said in that ruling that governments can put these restrictions in place, and the court seemed to echo that today. I mean, do you think that this opens the door, that the court could be more open to this kind of thing going forward?
I guess so. If you're a Martian, you land, and you think, the United States has decided not to allow people who beat their partners, throw them into the windshields of cars, shoot into houses. We're not going to allow that person to have a gun. You think, is this a hard call?
Right, right.
It's astonishing to me that this is even a case. and it shows how far we've gone. I don't know if the court will go further back. I'm a little disturbed by the larger precedent that they're arguing over, the historical pattern.
Right. This is the Gruen decision that Thomas enshrined.
Right. And so there are a lot of historical patterns that I don't really like.
Agreed.
And you might agree. And so to say that the status quo has a preference is seems to me like stare decisis on stilts.
Mm-hmm.
And would they have said that before the Dobbs decision? Oh, well, there's a historical pattern. When there's been an abortion, right to abortion, we're going to go with the historical pattern. It just seems to me it's biasing the court toward whatever is. And that's just really not for the court to decide. It's whatever is lawful, I get that. But whatever is, that seems to be stepping beyond the bounds.
Yeah. I mean, even the idea that there was pre-1900, the idea of spousal abuse, that a man could... I mean, the laws about this did not exist. Anyway, let's turn to immigration. This week, we saw President Biden issue this executive order that allowed some undocumented spouses and children of U.S. citizens to get a faster track to stay here in this country. Separate from what you think about this politically, Jonathan, does this feel like smart, sane policy to you?
In absence of congressional action, yes. What we're talking about are families that I call status discordant, where one is here, either fully naturalized or green card or something, and someone else in the family or multiple people in the family are here as undocumented. The level of insecurity, instability, fear that runs through that household is immeasurable. But also, we have to remember that those households, they're contributing to their communities. They're working, they're going to school, they're every much a part of the American fabric as if they were, full-on citizens. And so in absence of any kind of congressional action, I think it's right that the president moved to bring them fully, legally into the fold. It would be great if Congress were functioning and rational and able to, have a nice, substantive, rational debate where you could come up with a terrific, comprehensive immigration bill that would fold all these folks in. But I remember when President Obama was in the White House, the Senate passed a terrific immigration bill, and Speaker John Boehner just sat on it. We wouldn't be having this conversation if Speaker Boehner
Same thing recently, where Congress,
Right.
Republicans and Democrats got together, and President Trump picked up the phone and said, "Kill it," and it died.
Yeah.
Do you think that this helps offset, David, some of the concerns that Democrats and immigrants' rights activists had for President Biden's previous executive order that really closed off asylum seekers' access?
Yeah, I'm with Jonathan on the status of this thing. It just doesn't seem right to break up families. If an American marries you, I think you should pretty much count as an American. But as for the politics of this, I just think the president is looking reactive. It looked like we're way behind in the polls. We've got to be tough on the border. So a couple weeks ago, he's tough on the border. And then all the activist groups are upset with us, and probably a lot of the junior staff is upset. And so now we got to feint this way. And to me, it's just, set aside the substance of it, the politics of it, I think, are self-destructive. That the immigration issue is one of the top issues in the world today. And you just have to have a simple rule. I believe in immigration. We're going to control the border. That has to be it. And the British Labour Party is hitting the British Conservative Party from the right on this issue.
Right.
And so that's, to me, where Biden his job is to get reelected right now. And so to me, it's simple. Secure border, secure border, secure border. And I would not muddy that message.
We have seen from former President Trump some rather strange mixed messaging on this. He has both said, I'm going to round up everybody. I see you're already starting to smile. You can't control yourself here.
Finish your question, William.
You know what I'm going to say, that he said, I'm going to round up millions of people and throw them out of the country. And then just this past few days, he floats the idea of green cards for everyone who's here illegally who graduates from college. What is going on there?
Well, if I understand it, is if you are going to one of the elite universities, or even, not an elite university, but you're in school and you graduate, you should automatically get a green card with your diploma. Buckle up, America, because he's correct. He is absolutely right. It doesn't make sense that you get all of this talent coming in, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and then they graduate and then they have to leave. Donald Trump is right, but I don't believe him for 1 minute. for 1 minute. He made the same promise when he was president, did nothing about it, and was draconian in his immigration views and policies. So I don't believe that he is actually going to do this. And I would love it if at the debate on Thursday, if they ask him about that and see if he sticks with it. Because I do not believe him.
Do you believe him?
I sort of believe him. He's
Oh,
a
come
business
on.
person.
Because it feels like, as Jonathan's saying, common sense, that if you're educated here, like, be an American.
Well, that's not why I believe him, because it's common sense. I believe him because he's a business executive. He was in conversation at that moment with two tech executives, and that's their number one issue. And so he's an executive, immigration is good for business.
Right.
B,
educate them, put them into the workforce.
B, he's a politician, even though he pretends not to be, and he's saying the things that'll make the rich guys he's talking to, as happy as it's possible to be. Third, I observe the phenomenon that MAGA has moved a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. Further to the right, way further to the right than it was, and way further to the right than Donald Trump is. And that's true on abortion, that's true on immigration, that's true on a range of issues. So he is now looking a lot more flexible on all sorts of issues than his movement. And I think this is a pattern we're going to see.
One additional thing. Let's say he actually tries to follow through. I would like to know from where.
From which universities, you mean? Which colleges?
From which countries? Because I wouldn't put it past Donald Trump saying, if you're from Asia, Southeast Asia, no, you can't. You're not a part of this. If you're from Africa, no, you're not a part of this. If you're from Latin America, no, you're not a part of this. This does not apply to you. There's lots of evidence, lots of audio, lots of stories about how Donald Trump feels about countries that are not European, and specifically Northern European.
Lastly, Jonathan, you mentioned this debate. David, I'm curious what you think. There are a lot of Democrats who are openly worried about how President Biden is going to perform in this debate with Donald Trump. Van Jones, the political commentator on CNN the other day, said if Biden blows it, it is game over. How substantive, how important is this debate?
Well, I think it's a much bigger risk for Biden. Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's game over, but the rumblings to replace him would be massive, and I think maybe they could still try to do that. But so Biden really is laying it all on the line. Having said that, I understood why Biden wanted to debate this early. I think he needs a momentum shift more than Trump does. And I'm a little surprised that Trump went with all the rules that he went with, like cutting off the microphones when it's not your turn.
Right.
Donald Trump's MO is interruption.
Right.
And so I'm sure during the debate he'll actually be shouting at Joe Biden, but we'll just see his mouth moving, I guess. Maybe we'll hear a little through Biden's microphone. So I'm a little surprised that Trump agreed to do this, because he's got some cost here, too.
I mean, all along, he's just said, I'll debate you anywhere. I'll meet you in a street corner, and I'll do it. So anyway, something we'll all be watching for next week. David Brooks, Jonathan Capehart, great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, William.
This month, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi secured a third term, but his party lost its majority in parliament. Modi portrays himself as the strong leader of a rising India, but his 10 years in office have been marked by a fierce crackdown on dissent on millions of Indian citizens who belong to ethnic and religious minorities. Producer Zeba Varsi traveled across northern India to report on the impact on India's Muslims.
Nestled in northern India, Khatmika is a Muslim-majority village where the roads are dusty, crumbling walls are patched with sun-baked bricks, and the memories are searing. Last year, this forgotten hamlet suffered the unforgettable.
I couldn't believe it, but I had to come to my senses. I had no choice. We never thought something like this could happen to us.
We spoke to Sajida about her husband Junaid and his friend Nasir, killed by Hindu extremists last year. Their car torched, their bodies burnt. Junaid and Sajida raised 6 children. That's their eldest, 13-year-old Parwana, with their youngest, 4-year-old Warfan. Parwana seemed sick, depressed, and wouldn't speak much. Her mother told us she's been like this since her father's murder.
She has never recovered since her father was killed. We are trying to get her treatment. She had an attack after her father's death.
She truly never recovered. Just weeks after we met her, Parwana died. It's not clear how. The family blames heartbreak. The whole family is heartbroken. Junaid's cousin Ismail visits this gravesite often. The two men were so brutally beaten and burned, their remains were beyond recognition. So each gravestone bears both names.
To this day, people fear. The way in which Junaid and Nasir were abducted in broad daylight, people are still scared.
And people don't trust the police, who turned Junaid and Nasir away after they had been abducted, but before a mob burned them alive.
How could the police just send them away when they saw these men are on the verge of dying? Had the police done its job and helped them, and had they arrested those who beat them up instead of letting them take them away, Junaid and Nasir would have been alive today.
Why do you think your husband was targeted?
Because he was Muslim. He had no enemies, nothing, only because he was a Muslim.
Junaid and Nasir's alleged killers belong to Bajrang Dal, a far-right Hindu extremist group which the US once labelled a militant religious organisation. They attack Muslim men for allegedly smuggling and killing cows, considered sacred by many Hindus. During Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tenure, India has seen rising anti-Muslim violence by self-styled vigilantes. Videos like these of Muslim, Christian and other religious minorities being beaten are all too common. Human Rights Watch reported in recent years, dozens of Muslim men have been killed and hundreds injured in hate crimes. The prime suspect in Junaid and Nasir's case is this man, Monu Manesar, a local Hindu right leader, often seen with assault rifles. He used to upload videos of his own crimes against Muslims on social media. He has also been seen in the company of top government ministers, including Modi's right-hand man, India's Home Minister Amit Shah. Months after Junaid and Nasir's murder, he called for a provocative Hindu right rally in the same state where they were killed. The rally turned violent as Hindus and Muslims fought. At least 6 people were killed. A mosque was burnt and its young imam stabbed over a dozen times. The NewsHour's questions for local government officials and requests for an interview went unanswered. In the days after, the state government led by Modi's party launched a crackdown not against the suspects, but against their victims. This used to be a bustling cluster of Muslim-owned shops, businesses and homes that have now been reduced to rubble by Indian authorities. The government says it was targeting illegal construction, but activists and civil society experts say that this is part of a larger trend and that India's Hindu right government has weaponized demolishment of Muslim properties as a mode of collective punishment and to instill fear in the community.
There are many things which are illegally built in India, but the idea that it is just these particular habitations that's being targeted is, I think, symptomatic of the broader issue of essentially minorities being targeted because of their beliefs.
Milan Vaishnav is the director of the South Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He said Modi's government has condoned violence against India's religious minorities.
The state is sort of giving or granting a broad permission structure under which these groups are allowed to act with impunity.
Last year at the White House, next to President Biden, when he was asked about anti-Muslim discrimination, Modi issued a strong denial.
Democracy is in our DNA. We have always proved that democracy can deliver. And when I said deliver, this is regardless of caste, creed, religion, gender. There's absolutely no space for discrimination.
But Modi's election campaign was filled with anti-Muslim hate speech. He referred to India's 200 million Muslims as infiltrators. And within weeks of Modi's re-election, 3 Muslim men have been killed, allegedly in a hate crime. And over a dozen Muslim homes have been demolished in states ruled by his party.
These are not something that one election at the national level will do away with. I think it's fair to say that we can expect, more of this to continue in the months and years to come.
In January, he launched his campaign by fulfilling the promise of a grand temple at the same site where 3 decades ago a 16th century mosque was demolished. Days after, in the wee hours of a winter morning in New Delhi, his government flattened a 13th century mosque without notice. The government says it was an encroachment and an illegal structure on forest land. For these children, many of them orphans, that historic mosque was home. It is where they lived, studied and prayed, and they were made to watch it fall. Today they're sheltering at another smaller mosque. Rahil Khan is 10 years old.
I watched Iron Man. I want to build robots so we can send them to protect our country and save the lives of our soldiers. My dream is for my country.
But they fear their country is stifling their dreams.
We felt terrible. We wondered why they were demolishing our mosque and school. It didn't do any harm to anyone. They told me, this is not your school. This is the government's land now.
Afzal loves to play sports and is the designated troublemaker in the group. But on that day, he felt cold and helpless.
They dragged the mosque's chief and snatched his phone. No one was allowed to come in or go out of the compound. We were asked to get out of our room and made to stand out in the cold for hours.
I saw students were lying on floor on a single bed sheet. And they did not have jackets, they did not have shoes, they did not have sweaters. Seeing me there, they started crying.
Muzammil Salmani is their teacher. He accused the government of going out of its way to bring down the mosque in a sudden and secret manner.
Why do you think that mosque was targeted?
A 700-year-old mosque cannot be an illegal encroachment. They are demolishing the Constitution of India. They are demolishing an idea of India.
An idea of India where these young Muslims say they'll truly have equal rights and won't fear their future. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Zeba Warsi in New Delhi, India.
It's officially summer, which means it is a great time to go to the movies, and not just to get out of this heat. Jeffrey Brown learns what's headed to the big screen for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
Last summer, Hollywood strikes and the blockbuster Barbenheimer phenomenon.
You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves.
This summer, a slow box office start with Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, and The Fall Guy underperforming expectations. For a look ahead, I recently spoke with Aisha Harris of NPR and Mark Olson of the Los Angeles Times, starting with some of the season's biggest upcoming films.
I am definitely looking forward to, or at least curious about, A Quiet Place Day 1.
Shelter in place.
You may remember A Quiet Place, the original film, which was John Krasinski's directorial debut, and it was all about a family struggling to survive and raise their children in a world where the apocalypse has come. Giant aliens who are hungry and who have ultrasonic sound are lurking and waiting to kill them and eat them. But what I am most interested about this is the fact that it stars Lupita Nyong'o. It's great to see her actually helming a big budget franchise. I'm also very curious about, Fly Me to the Moon. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a big blockbuster hit, but it's a space rom-com directed by Greg Berlanti. He's known for Love, Simon, You. And Fly Me to the Moon is actually a sort of set during the space age. It stars Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum.
NASA needs a marketing specialist, and you are the very best.
Excuse me? What are you doing here?
I tracked you down because I felt we had a connection.
What?
And they are working together to try to create a version of the moon landing in case the actual moon landing doesn't work.
Mark Olson, your turn. Some big films you want to call our attention to?
Yes. Well, I think since the summer's kind of had a bit of a slow start at the box office with movies like The Fall Guy and Garfield and Furiosa underperforming, it's kind of putting a lot more pressure now on the movies that are coming out. I'm thinking of, for example, the movie Twisters.
Guys, whatever's in there, it's big and it's moving fast. Drive. Go.
It's directed by Lee Isaac Chung, who made the film Minari a few years ago. That was kind of a small family drama. And now he's helming this really big budget summer action sequel that's a reboot of the movie from the 90s. Another movie that's going to be coming out is going to be Deadpool and Wolverine, which is another film in the sort of Ryan Reynolds Deadpool sort of superhero satire universe, but this time adding Hugh Jackman's Wolverine character. And it's, I think those are two movies that Hollywood is going to be betting a lot of chips on, that those movies do well to help save the summer.
How about a couple of smaller independent films perhaps you saw on the festival circuit? Aisha?
Yeah, the first I want to recommend people look out for is Thelma, which is the directorial debut of Josh Margolin. And this is a movie I saw at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year. It stars June Squibb in what I believe is her first leading role in her 90s. And she plays a grandmother who finds herself on the end of a scam, and a scam that is usually perpetuated against elderly people. And she goes on the hunt to find the scammer and get revenge.
Mail $10,000 to this address.
$10,000? How did you think this was real?
Mom, you thought it was real too.
Oh my God.
It's a fun sort of action comedy about aging and also about, just trying to live your life and enjoying life at that age. And it also features a really lovely performance by Richard Roundtree, one of his final performances before he passed away last year. And another film I want to recommend, which was actually at Sundance in 2023, is Fancy Dance, that stars Lily Gladstone. And it's directed by Erica Tremblay. And Lily Gladstone has a fantastic performance here. She is playing a woman who is taking care of her niece after her sister goes missing. And she has to sort of figure out how to both bond with her niece, but also search for her sister.
I'm calling about my sister's case.
What a Sally!
No, I did speak to the sheriffs.
It shows a perspective of Indigenous life that I think we don't often see in Hollywood movies. So I'm very excited for that.
Mark Olson, some smaller films?
One film that premiered on the festival circuit back in the fall, and it's just coming out now. It's called Janet Planet. It's being released by A24. It's the writing and directing debut from the celebrated playwright Annie Baker, and it stars Julianne Nicholson as a single mother, kind of raising her 11-year-old daughter over a summer in the kind of rural Massachusetts.
And I think maybe it's ruined my life.
Can you stop?
Stop what?
Stop trying.
And it's just a very tender, mother-daughter story that I think is really exciting.
Have you ever played the nervous game before? Are you nervous?
Yes.
Another film from Sundance, it was called Dee Dee. It's a feature directing debut from Sean Wang. And it's just a tender coming-of-age story of an Asian American family. And it's just got a real energy to it. The young actor who plays the lead in that movie is just really thrilling to watch.
So here we are a year after the strikes, a year after the Barbenheimer phenomenon. Where do you see the industry today? Aisha?
We are still very much in a transition / trying to figure out things mode. Barbie and Oppenheimer, that was such a phenomenon that you could never duplicate. What I'm hopeful for is that we'll see continue to see sort of a mixture of films that are both very, very big budget in theaters, but also smaller. The problem is streaming just complicates everything. So people are just I can wait a couple weeks, I can wait a month until it goes on streaming. And I think that's been an option that's been way more enticing for the average moviegoer than it ever was before.
Mark Olson, where do you see the industry today?
Well, I think to Aisha's point that, moviegoing's a habit and people have just fallen out of that habit. And it's for a number of different reasons. Streaming certainly is one of them. I think, as you're saying, a lack of product. The strikes last year really impacted just what movies are coming out. Studios have become much more cautious in what they want to greenlight and spend money on. So there just simply doesn't feel like there are as many kind of big movies as there should be in a typical summer. And I think, you look at the prices for movies, especially with premium format. I think a lot of people are choosing to wait and see things at home, except for those movies that do feel like you want to get out in the theater to see it with a crowd. And right now, Hollywood's really struggling to deliver those impact films to audiences.
All right, much still in flux, but much on the screen this summer. Mark Olson and Aisha Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be sure to tune into Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight for a look at what to expect in next week's historic presidential debate. And on tomorrow's PBS News Weekend, a look at what's behind the lack of affordable rental units in Austin, Texas. That is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you so much for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.